We are ready to start our next project. This is going to be a very fun, very easy project. It is a brand new pattern of ours called Galactic Bars, and it's featuring Glitz and Glam from Hoffman Fabrics, and these fabrics are each ombre, and they're ombre from light to dark. So this one piece shows you the lightest and darkest, and then they meet in the middle. So, and they look like glitter. So if you're lovely like me and love glitter, this is a great group. So there's the whole range. So ombre fabrics can be tricky to work with. I'm not always a huge fan to design with them because you have to think about a lot of different things as you're designing it. So what I did was I chose to take the easy way out, and I think it made a really fun, easy, cool pattern. And if you love ombres but don't want to fussy cut the light, the medium, and the dark, this pattern's for you. Because what we do is we literally cut one strip from light to dark. That's it. And then we're going to sew them together in this zigzaggy pattern, and we have a cool modern quilt that is super, super easy. This is definitely a beginner project. And it's a beginner beginner for ombre projects. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to get it cut and then give you some tips on how to sew the rows together. But again, super, super easy. And I'll show you how to do these, the ombre borders when you don't have, that's way longer than 42 inches. So I'll show you how to get this pieced border to look like the picture. So let's get cutting. There we go, all our strips cut, just like that, piece of cake. So now we need to cut the borders and we need to cut the background. So to cut the black, we need to cut 4 3-inch strips, and then we are going to cut from each strip 1 3-inch square at the end. We want the lightest part because these are the corners in the quilt. And then we will cut the rest of the strips to measure 3 34.5 inches. Then we will cut 4 strips for the side borders. This is the only one that you have to fussy cut because it's an ombre, and we kept it to a very, very minimum. So I have this folded over. I have 2 layers, and I need to cut a total of 8 3-inch strips. 4 for the top and the squares and 4 for the sides. So when I double it over, I can then cut 2 at a time. Again, anytime I can be more efficient with my cutting, I take the opportunity. You also always want to cut off all your salvage because you don't want this stuff in your quilt. It has holes in it, it's got print on it. Now there's all kinds of cute projects out there to do with your salvage, but you don't usually want it in your quilt. Alright, so there's 4 of these that are going to be the sides, and then 4 of these are the top and bottom, and these are the ones we have to cut the little square off the end for our corner blocks. So we're going to line these up. I'm going to square it up again and then cut my 3-inch squares. Anytime you're stacking stuff to cut, it's always a smart idea to square up the end each time you start another series of cuts. There we go, there are lights, and then these, from starting at the dark end, so this end, we are going to cut our 34.5-inch strips. And because I have some extra, and there's things that can go on in a pattern, I am actually going to wait to cut the length until after I get the top together and can measure to make sure that everything works out the same. Because once I cut this, there's no going back. So this is my top, and those are my sides, and I don't want to confuse them, so I'm going to use these itty bitty markers, and I'm going to put let's see, there is a T in here somewhere. You get the whole alphabet, you get numbers, you can mark all your pieces with it. And then I went ahead and punched a hole in them so that I could use a safety pin and use them as markers for my fabric. And we sell these itty bitty markers on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and I will put a link to them below under the video. But now I know those are the tops and these are the sides that are not marked. And when I go to that step in a little while, I won't grab the wrong stack and cut them shorter. So those are the borders. All of my strips that I cut 6.5 by width of fabric need to be then cut to measure 41.5 inches. And we want to do it, you can do it however you'd like. I initially imagined starting at the darkest end and trimming off the lightest. You could also start in the center so it's even throughout. Totally up to you. If you start in the center, you can cut them with your ruler by cutting 41.5 is 20 3/4. So you can keep it folded, put the ruler on the fold at 20 3/4 and cut it off. I just want to double check myself. 41.5 divided by 2 is 20 3/4. That is going to be the easiest way to trim these up, and I'm all about easy, so I'm going to do it that way. And you can do them 2 at a time if you're confident with your cutting. But if you do it this way, you need to do it this way for all of your strips. You don't want to jump back and forth because then the lights and the mediums and the darks won't line up the way the illusion is set up. So now the next step is to pair them up with what white piece each one gets. And you can use the pattern here. It tells you the first one is the dark blue. So what I'm going to do is lay one dark blue piece, and the dark side is a 12-inch strip, and the other, you get one on each end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay one on this side and one on this side, and I'm just going to stick a straight pin through all the pieces so that I know those go together. Alright, so now we have them all paired up and pinned with the right pieces. So I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and sew each one onto each end of the fabric, and we will then have our rows for our quilt top. You do want to make sure, if you are using this same woven cream that I'm using, there is a right or wrong side, so make sure you're always putting right sides together. And we're going to go ahead and get all the rows sewn. Now we're over here at the sewing machine. We are ready to sew our pieces together for our rows. The other thing about how I set them up is now I know I'm starting with row 1, and if I keep them in the same order, I have them all ready to sew the rows together into the quilt top. I wanted to show you my setup over here, especially if you are a beginner doing this quilt. I have a video that I'll link below about how to make perfect 1/4-inch seams, but I cannot recommend enough. You need to have a 1/4-inch foot. That definitely will help you with your seams. But I also use a clearly perfect angle. That's this green lined cling thing that I've taped to my machine. And the Q Tools sewing edge. These are the 3 things I use to make an accurate 1/4-inch seam. That video that I'm linking below will show you how to attach this and this Q Tools bumper to your machine and how to cut it. So again, make sure you check out that link below. I'm using Aurifil 50 weight.
because I find that is the best cotton thread for piecing and quilting. I will be doing a whole video on Aurifil threads, but it's more expensive, but you get what you pay for. There's less lint, your machines are not getting as much of a workout, they're long strands of cotton so they don't break, and it's just one of those, once you start using it, it's hard to use another thread. So when you go to sew, I've already marked these, which piece goes on the dark end and which piece goes on the light end. So I can set this aside because I know that this one here goes on the dark end. You can have your pattern next to you and double check your pieces to make sure, but it's if you've done it right and laid it all out, you're good. If you have a light fabric that's really hard to tell the right side from the wrong side, just make sure you double check that. Now, as a beginner, you may want to pin these two pieces just so you're not trying to hold the fabrics together and sew. I don't tend to do a lot of pinning. I never did, because I had, it was just one more thing I had to pull out. So what I would recommend is try it with pins and try it without pins and decide what works best for you. So when we go ahead to sew, we're gonna put our piece under our 1/4 inch foot, and you can go a little past where the needle is going to come down. You don't want to go right on the end because it may chew it into the machine. I'm sure if you've done any sewing, you've experienced that. So I always kind of go like 32nds of an inch past the edge, especially on triangles, and it's fine because it's in your 1/4 inch seam allowance, so even if it's not right on the edge, it's good. You will not have problems. I take the 2 leader threads and I push them off to my side so I know where they are. You could also send a cheater piece of fabric through so you don't have to deal with these. Let me grab a piece of fabric. So a cheater fabric. So this is a way you can start the leader threads with a cheater fabric. It's just a little scrap of fabric. It doesn't have to be 2 layers. It can't, it doesn't matter. And you just sew through with that. And now you know all your tails are back here. They're not going to get tangled or knotted up. I do recommend that if you're just starting out. It does make it one less thing you have to deal with. So we get this under my pressing foot. The edges of my fabric are pushed up against the arm. I have a little flange on my 1/4 inch foot. Some do, some don't. But I also have this all bumped up to this bumper. It's about a 32nd of an inch high, so you know when you've gone over it, and you don't want to go over it because that is your 1/4 inch seam. And when I'm sewing, I don't look at the needle, I look back here. Once it's to the needle, it's too late to try to fix it. So I'm paying attention to this back here while the machine takes it through. And then you can actually flip the other end over. It's long enough. So I've just pulled it around, and then I can lay the other side on, and that is how I'm going to sew all of my rows. And they will stay in order. And this is called chain sewing, when you don't break your threads in between. And then we're on to the next one, and I'm just going to keep doing this, just feed them through. So I'm over at the ironing board and I'm ready to press these, and I thought since we're going over all the basics on this one, I was going to show you some basics on pressing. There. So when you are sewing, when you're piecing for a quilt, these are the guidelines to pressing. First, you want to make sure you have your iron set on cotton. I do not like to use starch or spray or any of that, but that's personal preference. Some people like how flat and stiff it gets. But I don't use steam in my irons, mainly because if you put water in your irons, they will last half as long, they will leak, even the really fancy ones do it, so I just don't put any water in my irons, they last longer. So when you go to press, I use the edge of my iron and I push it into the seam gently and just go back and forth. Some people will just do this. I don't feel like I get enough of a seam, but if you use the edge of your iron, and push into the seam, you won't get fabric rolled in that seam and it'll stay nice and flat. You don't want to press from the back unless you're going to press a seam open, and that's for another quilt. You want to press from the front just so you don't get excess fabric rolled in that seam. So there's that one. Another rule of thumb is you press towards the dark when given a choice. Sometimes when we get into more complex blocks, it doesn't matter light and dark, it's more the direction you're pressing to let the block lay flat. You'll see that in some of our other videos. But in this one, pressing towards the dark is just what we need. So then we're going to flip this over and we're going to press this side. And you'll see I lift up the strip, push the iron into the edge, and then lay the strip down. And that way I know I got it nice and flat. And there's row 1. So I'm just going to keep these in order so that then I can just grab them one at a time and start sewing the quilt top together. So I will get the rest of these pressed and show you how to get the rows together. So now that I have all our rows sewn and pressed, it's time to sew the rows together to make the quilt top. So when you're doing this, the dark side always goes to the left and the light is going to go to the right. And these should be the same size, same length. And you want to pin these. You don't just want to sew them together. You need to pin them because there are feed dogs in the machine on the bottom but not on the top. And that means the fabrics get pulled through at a different rate, and if you don't pin it, you can gather fabric into your seam and it's not noticeable till you look at your quilt top and it'll be all wavy at the end. So you want to pin, and the best way to do it is to pin one end and then pull it over and pin the other end and then pin in the center and then backfill as needed. So there's one end, there's the other. I mean, it doesn't have to be directly in the center, but you know, towards the center. Especially on strips this long. I usually say if anything's longer than 12 inches, you need to probably pin it. It will make your life a lot easier and make things match up better. So, and these are our magic pins. We carry these on our website. They're super sharp. The heads are easy to grip if you have trouble with your hands, and they're silicone, so they won't melt under the iron if you accidentally iron on your pin. And then once you get every row will be put like this. So once you get this row on, I'll sew the next one on. I'm working from the bottom up. You could work from the top down. You could work in the center and add on to each way. But however you do it, be consistent and make sure you refer to the picture to make sure you have the row going in the right direction, because ripping your seams is not fun when they're super long like this. They're never fun, but when they're super long, they're kind of a pain. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all our rows together to do the quilt top center, and I'll show you it when it's finished. Alright, so I have finished my quilt top, almost, but I want to show you that I made a mistake on it and why and what happened. So if you look, these all step 6 inches. So this one should end here and it's way back here. So what I figured out I did wrong is I sewed this piece on the light side, it needed to go on the dark, and vice versa. The little 6-inch square goes on the dark side. So I thought I would use this opportunity to show you what to do if you sew yours wrong. You can use a seam ripper and rip your seams. So you can use a seam ripper to rip your seams, and I do love these. We sell these on our website. I'll put a link down below. It's very sharp, and it has this little rubber tip that you can wipe away the loose hairs. And we also use a Zippy Ripper. I'm going to show you both in case you don't have a Zippy Ripper or don't want to order one from us. If you need to rip a seam, I learned this fairly early in quilting. You go on the side, there's one side that's going to be smooth and one side that's going to be a little more raised. It just depends on your machine, which side has got the bumpier side. But if you go in and you break every 4th stitch, you know, you don't have to count them, like 4 or 5 stitches. If you break every few stitches, and then you go to the other side, I'm having trouble seeing my stitches. You go to the other side, you take your seam ripper underneath the thread, and it'll pop all your threads. Okay, so let me do that again over here. Let's see. So you take your seam ripper and you go every couple stitch. I do about every 4th, 5th stitch. And if one side is fighting you and you can't get the ripper under it, you certainly can just try the other side. Like I said, one side is going to be raised up more than the other. That's just how machines are sewing. So then once we have several, you flip it over, stick this under, and there you go. And that gets you a lot faster. It gets the seam ripped apart much quicker. So that is the traditional way to do it. You could also use a blade in between and cut them. That one's a little more risky, that you'd cut your fabric, but that would also work. There's as many ways to unsew as there is to sew. But then they came out, a bunch of people came out with trimmers, and they were using the fathead trimmers to rip seams a few years ago, and I didn't like those because it was overpowering. It was too much power to rip a seam, and if you push too hard it would rip right through your fabric. So I went out and I found this guy. We call it the Zippy Ripper. It only has 5 little blades at the top. And I'm going to turn it on and go, but I'll turn the sound down on the video because it buzzes like a shaver. But you'll see how quickly it will rip this big long seam for us. And I love this thing. I take it with me everywhere when I teach. We do have these on our website. You can order them. I'll put that link down below. But they're just the best at ripping seams. Now, if you hold it on there long enough, you will eventually go through your fabric. So you don't want to hold it, you know, for a minute or two. You just want to hold it to break the threads. But you use your hand on the base fabric and you have your top fabric, and when you turn it on, you're going to gently let the ripper go through the threads and gently hold this and move it back. You don't want to pull it because you can stretch your fabric. So here we go. Okay, and you can see how quick and easy that was, and it does leave a long string on one side that you can then pull, and it'll take all the tails with it. But then I also will use this if it's something that I have a lot of threads. It just, you rub it on there and it loosens them up, and you can get them out of the seam so you don't have to deal with them later. So the combination of the two works really well. And so I'm going to go ahead, rip this, fix it, and get back on track with it, and I'll show you what I've done. We have our Galactic Bars quilt top done. This is a big one, so I don't have a really good place to show it all at once until we get it quilted and up on the rack. But I do want to share this with you to show you the top. You can see here how the borders, the light hits in the middle, goes to dark. There's our cornerstones, and then the bottom does the same thing. It goes to light. And you can see that the glitter bars, the Glitz and Glam from Hoffman Fabrics, is all dark on the one side and light on the other side. And just goes down. And you can see the step pattern and how that works. So this is the quilt top. We are going to get it off to the quilter. Monica Chrome is going to quilt this one, and I do want to do a quick shout out to Hoffman Fabrics for sending us Glitz and Glam. This is a new pattern for us and a new line for them. So stay tuned. We'll show you what it looks like all quilted. Here's our Galactic Bars featuring Glitz and Glam from Hoffman Fabrics, and we've got it back from Monica. She quilted some horizontal stripes across it just to mimic the design, to keep it having a nice modern feel. You could do an all over on this. I just thought this would be a nice basic quilting job for it. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it. This is a great pattern for beginners, and it's a great pattern for people who just don't want a fussy cut ombre fabrics, because we use the whole range in the strip, and by having all this dark ends on one side and all the light ends on the other, it just gives you this great flow and feel. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, make sure you like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.